Today on the Diabetes Podcast.
Reducing fructose specifically helps a lot.
Is this where the don't eat the fruit myth comes from?
Yes. Fruit intake is associated with a lower risk of type 2 diabetes, a lower cardiovascular risk, lower mortality, and a healthy body weight. Adiponectin tells your muscles to burn fat for fuel. It tells your liver to stop making sugar. It reduces inflammation in your blood vessels, and it improves insulin sensitivity. So in the person with type 2, adiponectin levels are 30 to 50% lower than in people without diabetes.
Hello and welcome to the Diabetes Podcast. I'm Richie.
And I'm Amber.
And Amber, today we're talking about part 2 of our revisit of the 12 core defects of diabetes, catching our new listeners up. We started out doing a 12-part series on all the many ways that diabetes is going to mess you up. And we decided to revisit that because
potentially. The reason we do this podcast is to ixnay on that.
Can potentially, in a long enough timeline, will absolutely mess you up. We're trying to distill this down into something a little bit more palatable than having to listen to 12 episodes, which you are more than welcome to listen to. But again, I want to get you the information that you need, hopefully in a more condensed manner with a little bit of polish. So, Amber, take it away.
Woohoo. I thought that we would talk about these forgotten organs because it's not every day that like your skin is an organ, for example. We're not talking about the skin, but fat is an organ and your gut is an organ.
And I think the understanding of fat as an organ is pretty recent. This is relatively newer information that just how metabolically active that adipose tissue is.
Yeah, I would say newer in the sense of maybe mainstream. I would say in the scientific literature, 20 years or so, give or take. So it just depends on who you ask how new it is. But I think even more and more discoveries come out every day with being able to view things better and AI and different strategies. You can examine things that were maybe not able to examine in such a way before. So your body fat is not a storage unit. Your body fat is the largest endocrine organ that you have. It's actively pumping out hormones, inflammatory signals, and metabolic instructions 24 hours a day, 7 days a week for your life. And it's talking to your brain, your liver, your pancreas, your gut, constantly chitter chatter. And it's bigger than your liver, bigger than your brain, just talk. And so I think with an organ so large, you just can't underestimate how much of the behind the scenes action is going on with that. And then we're also going to talk about your gut microbiome. I think this is something that's definitely been talked about a lot more in recent years. And we'll get into how the lining of your intestines can help some things permeate the gut and some things not, and just how that works with absorption of nutrients, just kind of high level overview of that. So the reason that matters is if you've ever felt like you're doing quote unquote all the right things, eating well, taking your meds, walking, getting good sleep, and the numbers still won't budge, there's a good chance that behind the scenes fat or gut dysbiosis, just so meaning dysfunctions, like something's going not so great. Biome is just the life, the condition of living in that environment. And then osis is just condition of being. So
the neighborhood in your guts is going to heck.
Well, we hope not. But if kind of like nothing really makes sense, that could potentially, I'm not saying it absolutely is, because there are 42 plus factors that can affect your blood sugar, but these could be two really huge pieces of that 42 factor puzzle.
And I'm sure all of that gut dysbiosis can be cured by whatever yogurt Jamie Lee Curtis was pushing a couple of years ago.
That yogurt did not agree with me, by the way, just saying. No, we're going way deeper than a container of yogurt. That yogurt can kind of go in the
white foods.
No, I was thinking more it could go in the grift kind of part really it's more of the marketing mayhem piece. And I love Jamie Lee Curtis, nothing against.
Not going to fix your gut dysbiosis. Okay.
And listen, nothing against Jamie Lee Curtis. Big fan, especially, what was that movie with Arnold Schwarzenegger where they were
True
married?
Lies?
True Lies. Yeah.
It's good stuff.
She's great. So, but many things. So anyway, this is not a movie review. So yet again, we'll reel it back. How long did it take before we took a side road?
I'm not sure. It was probably my fault.
Yeah, it's okay. I like that answer. All right. Okay. So let's think about, when you think about body fat, what comes up in your head in terms of like how it behaves or what it looks like?
The truffle shuffle. It's jiggling and it's moving around.
Okay. So like maybe it's yellow. It's like, I always think of like if you have an oil and vinegar dressing, like you got the blobs or like a lava lamp kind of, I think of.
So the image that comes to my mind is like the gym that we go to. Every time you go in there, they've got like the
5 pounds of fat, 3D, like that picture.
Bit. So that's what I think of. And it's hard yellow plastic.
But that is made of living cells called adipocytes. And those cells have some big jobs to do. So they're going to, of course, what we all kind of think of with fats is energy storage. And the two less obvious ones, well, this one's kind of obvious too, would be insulation, fat as insulation for organs, as insulation from the cold even. And the other is making hormones. Lots of hormones. And I think that's the piece that people really don't think about when you think about the action of fat and what it does and what it's for. The specific hormones that your fat makes are leptin, adiponectin, resistin, and this whole resistin, yes. You got a whole alphabet soup of these adipokines. And these hormones travel all over your body, telling your brain whether you're full, telling your muscles whether to use sugar or fat for fuel.
I think that resistin was active when we were trying to get our kids to eat their Brussels sprouts. They were resisting all kind of cruciferous
you're in
vegetables.
timeout.
I'm in timeout.
Speaking of kids, you're in timeout. All
right. They can't all be winners.
Okay, I agree. They cannot. So anyway, telling your brain whether you're full, telling your muscles whether to use sugar or fat or whatever for fuel, telling your liver whether to dump glucose, and telling your pancreas how hard to work. And many times when we talked about the fat being chatty before, I think the role of a middle manager kind of works well here. Not just not all middle managers are created equal, but I'm thinking like that really, what's the word I'm looking for? Help.
I think you're
there's the word I'm looking for. Okay. The micro manager there. And this middle manager is sending out terrible memos, creating this very bad company culture in this particular scenario. Just bad memos to everyone. So not all fat are the same. So there's the fat you can pinch. That's your subcutaneous fat. That's your pinchable, kind of the more visible fat we talked about in the last episode. I think it was, or the last one that we did on the core defects, the difference between subcutaneous and visceral. And so that pinchable fat would be the fat on the back of your arms, the fat on your thighs. If you kind of shake a little.
Would like the love handles be in the
Yes, the love handles are a great place. Subcutaneous fat hangs out your hips, outer thigh area, especially for women, and you can pretty much pinch it. And this fat is actually very well behaved fat. We might not care for it too much, but in terms of metabolic, the way that it acts, it's very well behaved. It doesn't do much except storing energy and insulating your body. It can produce some helpful hormones actually, and just doesn't usually cause problems. The troublemaker is that visceral fat, as we have said many, many times before. And visceral, again, means around your organ. It sits deep in your abdomen, wrapping around your liver, your pancreas, your intestines. Cannot pinch it, cannot necessarily see it. Like you can see a widening of the midsection, but you don't really see it under the skin, if you will. But you can sometimes feel it, like that firm belly that doesn't squish. So that little boy that said, I got a root beer belly. Anyway, kids don't tend to have as much visceral fat as adults. It's that over time getting shuttled to the liver, getting processed, hanging out in and around the organs. So stress causes it. Sleep loss can cause it. High insulin causes it. And genetics can play a role.
Clarifying.
Yes.
Is it stress or like sustained stress?
Sustained stress, and also kind of more like what you would call bad stress, because you can have something called eustress, which is kind of like this net neutral, if you will.
Well, like when you exercise, that's eustress. I'm going to
Yes.
submit my body to a stimulus, which
Yep.
is uncomfortable or maybe strenuous for my muscles, tendons, all that kind of stuff. But the response is to strengthen or to build new tissue and that kind of stuff would be an example of eustress.
Yes. So eustress is not going to increase visceral fat. In fact, if it's because you're exercising and weightlifting, then it's probably doing the opposite of creating visceral fat. But it's the prolonged stress that helps create visceral fat storage around your organs. And also somebody could be skinny and still have visceral fat. They're not mutually exclusive. And there's a word for that called TOFI. It means thin on the outside, fat on the inside, TOFI. And there are people walking around actually with a normal body mass index, which I've heard a lot of discussions in the social circles about body mass index lately. A lot of people who weightlift and bodybuild, and football players who say that their BMI puts them in the obese category, but they're really not unhealthy in that way that they would fit this BMI chart purpose that was originally created for obesity. Remember that the BMI charts were created by insurance companies to look at who we want to pay for and who we don't want to pay for, and the premiums and things like that. Yes. So they just looked at where people kind of fell, and the people that different cutoffs of their weight to height ratio that was a higher risk profile for their insurance. So these are just lumping people into groups. It's just a way that they use to categorize people. And then because so much of insurance dictates medicine, and sometimes vice versa, but more in the way of insurance to medicine, unfortunately, that's where that came from. So it is a tool, but it's not the only thing you should have in your tool chest. It's not going to tell the answer for everyone. So anyway, you can be thin on the outside, fat on the inside, and you could have a normal BMI and have dangerous amounts of visceral fat around your liver and pancreas. And you could have type 2 diabetes and still be thin. Now, there's a very good chance that's also latent autoimmune diabetes of adulthood, or LADA, or MODY, or some other kind of, or type 3C, or different kind of diabetes. But it could also be type 2, especially I've seen quite a few people who have type 2 diabetes, but they look, a little guy that let's go out to the kitchen like, oh, I'm hungry for a hunk of cheese.
Yeah.
Who's that guy? He has a name.
I think you're just
I'm not making it up.
No, it's Saturday morning cartoon flashbacks.
Yes.
I know exactly what you're talking about,
Yes.
but I don't know the name.
Anyway, he has little tiny legs with his little cowboy boots,
Yeah.
and a very round abdomen. So I've seen that person in endocrinology offices with type 2 diabetes.
A real apple. Yeah.
Yes, a real apple. And I'm not talking about, and a lot of that has also contributed by a diagnosis of fatty liver, is kind of giving that roundness shape as well. So waist circumference is really a better tool than BMI. And so anything over 35 inches for a woman or 40 inches for a male would be a red flag, no matter what the scale says. That's a
So,
red flag
and for the males
visceral
out
fat.
there, this is waist circumference, not pant size.
Oh, man, you called it. Yes. So we are talking around the largest part of your abdomen. I'm so glad you called that out, because I know a lot of men that
I was
would be
thinking,
going
oh man,
right
I'm
around
good. And I was like, am I good? I'm not sure. I think I'm
You're
good.
good. You're good. Yeah. Because I think the last time, well, I don't even want to guess, but it was under 40. I do remember that. So why is visceral fat the bad guy? What do you think? We already know it's because it is a direct driver of type 2, because it is sending these signals out for the hormones that can increase inflammation.
The inflammatory cytokines, which are my least favorite kind of.
Yes. So visceral fat cells are really bad at holding on to fat. And
what?
Visceral fat cells are bad at holding. It's kind of like leaky. It's leaky. They constantly leak fatty acids into your bloodstream. So they create these free fatty acids. And that can also show up as high triglyceride levels also, because it's all kinds of free fatty acids. And those fatty acids travel directly to your liver, because visceral fat literally drains into the liver through a special vein called the portal vein. And fat can accumulate in the liver when fatty acid delivery and fat production exceed the liver's ability to oxidize, export, and utilize those fats. So in other words, you have overeaten time and time again, and you're trying to store it and shuttle it and fit it all over the place.
So I've got an analogy. Let me know if it works.
Okay.
So your fat cells are basically stored energy. That's kind of like barrels of like oil, right? So there's fuel in these barrels. And if it's subcutaneous fat, those barrels are, depending on how big my stockpile is, depending on how much I have, but those are intact barrels, right? Visceral fat is more like really old, rusty barrels that have maybe some holes in it. And the fuel is like leaking into the ground and creating like this toxic brownfield that's going to have to be remediated and all this other kind of stuff. So there's the storage facility. The subcutaneous would be like the clean storage facility that's on hand, and we can ship this to wherever it needs to get used, or can be used as a different form of energy. The visceral fat is when was the last time we checked on those cans? And oh man, this is not looking good. And we're going to need the EPA is going to come in here and have some problems. That
Yes, sounds good to me.
Okay.
And it's also inflamed. And that's,
so the whole facility's on fire.
Yes, it is full of the cells called macrophages. And those are immune cells. They gobble up the bacteria and viruses and clean up stuff. And the macrophages that are in your visceral fat are angry. And they're pumping out inflammatory signals that we've talked about before, like tumor necrosis factor alpha and interleukin 6, which travel all over your body, and they create insulin resistance everywhere. Kind of like this low-grade wildfire going on, and the smoke is reaching every organ. And then visceral fat hormonally suppresses adiponectin. And adiponectin is one of the good fat hormones. It improves insulin sensitivity. It protects your blood vessels. It reduces inflammation. And the more visceral fat you have, the less adiponectin that you make. Because evolutionarily, visceral fat was a short-term survival tool. You put it on during a big feast, and then you'd burn it off during a time of famine. And your body never expected our modern society feast mode all the time. It never expected to keep visceral fat for 30 years. And so modern life, constant food, constant stress, no famine, keeps the visceral fat in place permanently. and the body was not designed for permanent visceral fat. So it's like your body is on this 1.0 version, and maybe it needs to be on version 16 or 23. So it's on that old software version. And that's been important in a very meaningful way for many of years. I have all sorts of ancestry, but one is very Irish, and the Irish potato famine will prove that point, that people used to starve. It wasn't always that you could just go to your fridge or go to the grocery store and get what you needed. And genetics just does not change that quickly. And we've talked about how epigenetics is a more quickly a dimmer switch that can be turned on or off, but that the genetics cannot change that quickly. And we covered that quite a bit in our environment type podcast that we did, if you're more interested in that. So then we have, I guess let's talk more about adiponectin, or the good guy, a little more understanding of that. So I like to think of this as the quiet janitor of metabolism. And it just does so much beautiful work in your body. I'm a big fan of adiponectin. Like, hi, I'm a big fan of your work. It's made by the fat cells. And here's what's interesting. The leaner you are, the more adiponectin you tend to have, or the more you make, which is backwards from what you might expect. But adiponectin tells your muscles to burn fat for fuel. It tells your liver to stop making sugar. It reduces inflammation in your blood vessels, and it improves insulin sensitivity. So kind of the opposite of what we were talking about with visceral fat. So when adiponectin goes down, all those protections go down. And in type 2 diabetes, this is like astounding to me. Adiponectin levels are typically 30 to 50% lower. So in the person with type 2, adiponectin levels are 30 to 50% lower than in people without diabetes.
Is this why it's often very hard to reduce fat when you have type 2 diabetes?
Yeah, I mean, I think we've had many podcasts up to this point talking about the avalanche effect and how it becomes harder and harder and harder.
I want to burn the fat, but I don't have enough of the hormone to tell my body to even burn the fat. Yeah.
Sometimes. Okay. Yeah. And so to increase adiponectin levels, things that you can do would be just lose some visceral fat. Every time, I can't say that every single podcast. I'm like, just lose some weight, just because it's such a silly thing, I think, sometimes to say, like, just do that. I feel like the Nike slogan, like, just do it. There are many ways and many things that we've talked about in this podcast that could help. And I know there are challenges, but even losing 5 to 10 pounds of visceral fat, so that big thing that you see at the gym that you were talking about, if you lose that, you can double your adiponectin levels. So very significantly. And then once you get that going, it creates a better help on the side of creating more fat loss. And another way to increase your adiponectin levels would be to exercise, especially, can you guess?
Weight training, resistance training?
Yes, very good. Especially resistance training, lifting things, carrying things, squatting things, push-ups, and then also eating more monounsaturated fats, which would be olive oil, avocados, nuts. Those directly raise adiponectin.
So I feel it's appropriate to call out perhaps one of the most glaring omissions in the new federal guidelines, which is to increase the amount of, let's just say, meats, red meats, I think from an effort to get your protein up, and while simultaneously recommending that you reduce the amount or maintain a low amount of saturated fat.
It's an oxymoron.
You can't do both of those at the same time.
At the same time. Exactly. Yeah, and that's really the thing. So we can just do the Mediterranean grandma diet and be good. Olive oil and squats. So then you have leptin, which is the fullness hormone and is an adipokine. And it's the I'm full hormone. So it's made by your fat cells. So the more fat you have, the more leptin you make. And leptin's job is to travel up to the hypothalamus in your brain and say, hey, we got plenty of energy stored. You can stop eating now. And if you want to, you can kind of start burning some fuel. That'd be great. And so the more fat you have, the more leptin, the less hungry you would be, in theory. And that's the thing. In practice, type 2 diabetes and in obesity, the brain becomes leptin resistant. And as with insulin, leptin levels are usually high, not low. And a person with obesity, and not everyone with type 2 diabetes is obese, just as a reminder, but a person with obesity typically has 5 to 10 times the leptin levels of a lean individual. So your fat cells are screaming, we are full, stop eating. And the brain is our teenagers with their headphones on, cannot hear that message. So it's pretty much the same as insulin resistance, but it's your leptin resistance. The hormones get made, the receptors stop listening, the body keeps acting like it's starving. And the more you eat, the more fat you store, the more leptin you make, and the more resistant your brain becomes. It's a feedback loop, but in the wrong direction.
I'm starting to have a really good appreciation for the movement piece as a means to mitigate the worst effects of this disease.
Yes.
If only because it sounds like it's the only thing that I have conscious control over.
Well,
like if all of these hormones and all of this signaling is malfunctioning, like my brain is telling my heart to beat, but I'm not controlling that, right? There's all of these functions that you're describing are largely outside the control of the individual with this disease, but they can choose to move more. That is a choice that you can make on a daily basis. And to some degree, like better food selection. These are choices that you can make every day. And that sounds like almost the only choices that you have, because everything else is kind of going south and really beyond your conscious control. For somebody that feels at the mercy of this thing, that's really almost the two things that you do still have some degree of control over, and probably should exercise control over those mechanisms more often.
Well, I mean, that's why we have so many podcast episodes where we talk about different levers you can pull, different things that you can do. But I will say, as a dietitian by trade, one of the biggest variables, if you had to estimate somebody's energy needs, one of the biggest variables would be how much muscle mass the person had and how much they exercise. Like exercise could completely change how many calories that person needs in a day. So like somebody's basal metabolic rate is typically somewhere between 1,100 calories to 1,600 calories, depending on their age, their height, their weight, all of this stuff. But the most variable thing would be the exercise factor, because it could be just a 1, or it could be a 2 or a 2.5. And you ask anyone that has trained for Ironmans or marathons, like how many calories they eat a day. Like you can look up, oh my gosh, Michael Phelps. I was like trying to think of his name. Yeah. You can look up Michael Phelps and how many calories
I think it was upwards of 9,000 calories.
Yes. So
season,
that right there just tells you how much your body can burn and how much of a deficit you could create to lose weight if you absolutely had to. And sometimes, many times in the case of type 2 diabetes, you absolutely have to. Like you don't have to, but you kind of have to. And just for perspective, a pound of fat is 3,500 calories. So Michael Phelps, if he did not replace and eat those 9,000 calories a day, he could lose 2.5 pounds, give or take, every single day if he was fasting and doing those. Now, if he was fasting, there's no way he could have the same high output workouts, but let's just assume that he somehow he could lose a lot of weight really fast. And in somebody who didn't have a lot of weight to lose, that could be detrimental. So the good news is, as with many things that we've talked about on this podcast, leptin resistance is reversible. Sleep helps, reducing inflammation helps, which is going to be reducing that visceral fat. Walking helps, and interestingly enough, reducing fructose specifically helps a lot.
Is this where the don't eat the fruit myth comes from?
Yes, absolutely. This is where the don't eat fruit myth originated. So we're going to talk about that. So unlike glucose, fructose is initially processed by the liver, and for that reason gets the bad reputation. So it bypasses phosphofructokinase, which is a major metabolic checkpoint, and fructose can more readily drive de novo lipogenesis, so the making of new fat cells, triglyceride production, and very low density lipoprotein secretion when consumed in excess. So number one, you have to eat it in excess, and it's not fruit sugar, number two. So this is where the concern with fructose comes from, is in the research that generated concern involved high fructose corn syrup sweetened beverages, excess calories, weight gain, and less insulin secretion after fructose, less acute leptin secretion, and less ghrelin, the hunger monster, if you will. So less ghrelin suppression compared to equivalent glucose loads. So the thinking, perhaps, I mean, I wasn't the one doing the thinking. I've never said that fruit is something to be avoided in someone who has type 2 diabetes. The thinking was perhaps that fructose may generate weaker satiety signals, and that it could be shuttled directly to the liver and packaged as these very low density lipoproteins. But as with much of nutrition, and as we've said many times in this podcast, there is very important nuance. So those studies did not use fruit. They used highly processed foods and high fructose corn syrup, which is a very inexpensive sugar made from corn. I think most people know that at this point, but it's highly refined sugar from corn, and it's well known that liquid calories bypass many satiety mechanisms. And fruit is a completely different physiologic package. Fruit does contain fructose, and it also contains water, fiber, polyphenols, cell walls, the involvement of chewing, slower digestion, and lower energy density when compared to high fructose corn syrup, which dramatically changes the response in your body. And it's also important to note that many large epidemiological studies, fruit intake is associated with a lower risk of type 2 diabetes, a lower cardiovascular risk, lower mortality, and a healthy body weight. So the concern is not fructose as a molecule. The concern is fructose delivered rapidly in large amounts without fiber and in a caloric surplus. So too many calories in. So the fullness hormone can come back online if we let it, by reducing ultra processed foods, by reducing overeating, really trying to stop before that feeling of full, because usually you're already behind if you stop when you're full. And I don't mean like don't listen to your hunger signals necessarily, like kind of check in with your body. I'm more talking about that piece, and losing weight if needed or if able to with some guidance. And that hunger will drop dramatically. People are shocked at how much less they want to eat once that leptin signaling is restored.
So apples and oranges, okay. Apple juice and Sunny Delight, probably not so much.
Sunny Delight is not even, I don't even know what's in that.
Well, that's why I didn't say
There's
orange
citric
juice.
acid.
Not that orange juice is much better. Basically, it's the don't drink the calories. If you got to chew it, you're probably going to be better off than if you're just guzzling it down.
Yes. So we've focused on fat, and now we are going to switch organs to the gut. Okay. And this is the other kind of forgotten organ in the story of type 2
So
diabetes.
when you say the gut, what you're talking about is our digestive tract, correct?
I'm more talking about the small and large intestine, actually. But technically,
Part of
your
the
digestive tract. Yeah. Yep. So the gut research in the past 10 years has completely reshaped how we think about type 2 diabetes. And so when you ask the question about what is the gut, what am I talking about? Specifically, the intestinal lining is so like the actual wall of your gut. And it's actually about 1 cell thick and wrapped in immune cells.
1 cell thick.
1 cell thick. That is it. Between you and the contents of your intestines is a wall that is literally 1 cell wide. So it's actually beautiful when it works. It lets all the nutrition from the food that you eat get in. But when it gets damaged, things can get really bad really fast. So there's your gut microbiome, which is about 100 trillion bacteria plus fungi plus viruses all living in your large intestine. They outnumber your human cells by a lot, like a lot.
They're just smaller?
Yes. Okay. By cell count, you are more bacteria than human. But obviously, by like mass, not necessarily density and such. So your gut hormones, your gut makes up to about 30 different hormones, GLP-1 being one of them. That's the one we kind of talk about the most, but we also talked about ghrelin, the hunger monster. It also makes GIP, glucagon-like insulinotropic polypeptide, peptide YY, and CCK. And these hormones control hunger, fullness, insulin release, gastric emptying, other things, you name it. So the gut is not just digesting food. That is the big takeaway from this. It's running just like fat is not just storage of energy. You have this whole hormonal symphony going on in your gut. And it's so interesting because I was thinking like even worms have a more complex digestive system than was originally thought. Like for most of history, we've thought of the gut as just this in and out tube, in, out, food in, poop out, end of story. And now we know it's a very complex, intelligent organ that's actively shaping your blood sugar, your mood, your inflammation, your immune system. And when I say your mood, it's because most of your serotonin is made in your gut, but that's a whole nother episode for later. So the way that your gut microbiome relates to your blood sugar, because like, what's the connection there necessarily? So we talked about the role of fiber and how increasing fiber can increase the fuel that feeds your gut bacteria and can more specifically help the good bacteria become more proliferative than the bad. And that's kind of like that balance going on all the time. So certain bacteria digest fiber for you because you cannot digest fiber. Your gut bacteria digest the fiber. And when they digest it, they produce these magical molecules called your short chain fatty acids. And that's where the butyrate comes from that feeds the good bacteria, but also propionate and acetate. And butyrate feeds your gut lining and helps reduce inflammation and can improve insulin sensitivity. It helps your liver act nicely, behave, not put out glucose inappropriately, glucagon as well. And it supports the tight junctions between cells. So it's really maintaining a good intestinal barrier because there's only 1 cell thick there. So we want to keep that barrier solid. And it does all those things from the fiber that you eat. And the microbiome talks directly to your immune system. And about 70% of your immune cells live near your gut. And I will tell you, if you've ever cleaned out somebody else's fridge and you looked at how many expired things were in their fridge and the questionable stuff that we sometimes eat, you will understand why 70% of our immune cells live in our gut. It is absolutely necessary. And the bacteria in your gut are constantly training your immune cells, either calming them down or hyping them up, so that a bad microbiome means a hyped up immune cells all the time, and there's going to be more inflammation and more insulin resistance in that situation. And people with type 2 diabetes constantly have a less diverse gut microbiome than people without. So typically fewer butyrate producing bacteria in their gut and more inflammatory bacteria. And those are you going to try to say it? Okay.
I'm going to ask a chicken or egg question. Is it less diversity in my gut microbiome that's contributing to type 2 diabetes, or is type 2 diabetes causing me to have less diversity in my gut?
I would say that it's less diversity in your gut microbiome that is contributing to the type 2 diabetes. But I would say it's all interconnected, because all of the things that create inflammation, the way of eating, the ultra processed foods, those things can alter your gut microbiome. So everything is connected.
If I go back and I'm trying to remember, I'm pretty sure that this was the gut dysbiosis episode, is when we did the healthy
Talked
gingo.
about the firmicutes.
Or the
firmicutes,
firmicutes and the bacteroidetes. And if I remember correctly,
that's what I thought you were going to say.
Not the solution, but to promote diversity, one of the things to do was to not just eat more fruits and vegetables, but specifically to eat a variety of fruits and vegetables.
Absolutely.
So the diversity of inputs basically contributes to diversity in the gut.
Yeah.
Okay.
That is very true. I'm not sure how that comes back to the chicken or the egg.
Well, it's more just that, oh, hey, in my mind, I'm trying to work it out.
Okay.
It's not, oh, hey, you have less diversity in your gut and you have type 2 diabetes. It's, hey, you have less diversity in your gut and this is making your situation worse. So
I would say it's the latter more than the former.
Address the gut diversity to improve the symptoms of type 2 diabetes, I guess is
absolutely. Absolutely. Yes, because less gut diversity is going to be more inflammation, because in the gut, diversity is everything.
And that's something you can control. I mean, that's just choices on a weekly basis and trying to make sure you're making variety and not one solution.
Exactly, because less diversity is going to be worse outcomes.
Okay. So while we're talking about the gut, can you talk a little bit about leaky gut? Because I'm guessing if there's only one cell separating the stuff in my gut from the rest of my system, that doesn't sound like a particularly robust system, and sounds like it has the potential to just be fraught with potentially holes or leaks, which I suspect is what happens in leaky gut. Is that right? Yeah.
The proper, the scientific term for that, leaky gut, is more of a marketed term. And the scientific term for that would be intestinal permeability. And you want your intestines to be somewhat permeable, because things are coming in and out, but your body controls what that is very tightly. And so hopefully we'll try to clear some of that out, because there's a lot of nuance within that. So your cells are held together by these little proteins called tight junctions. And they're like little Velcro between the cells, and that Velcro can loosen up. And things that can cause that Velcro to loosen up or increase intestinal permeability would be stress, lack of sleep, certain medications like your non-steroidal anti-inflammatory class of drugs, heavy alcohol, highly processed food, and even more specifically, low fiber, high sugar diets. So when that Velcro loosens, particles that should stay inside the gut start leaking through and go into the bloodstream. And mostly these that leak through are called lipopolysaccharides or lipopolysaccharides, like however you want to potato. And so we're called those LPSs, which is funny because Maggie and Ella used to play with little LPSs when they were little. So these LPSs the kids used to play with were cute. These lipopolysaccharides, not as much. So it's the outer coating that covers certain gut bacteria. And when lipopolysaccharides or LPS get into your bloodstream, your immune system freaks out. It's not supposed to happen. It's not supposed to be there because it's thinking you've got this very serious bacterial infection. And so your immune system is throwing out all the alarms, red alert, code blue, if you will. So it pumps out inflammation signals, and that inflammation creates insulin resistance everywhere, your muscles, your liver, your fat tissues, your brain. And intestinal permeability leads to chronic inflammation, which leads to insulin resistance, which leads to type 2 diabetes. And it's kind of the cleanest version of the chain. There's a lot of things involved, but well documented across many research studies, and that people with type 2 diabetes have higher levels of LPS in their bloodstream. And another term that you could call that would be metabolic endotoxemia. So endotoxins in the blood and toxin in the blood from the inside. So leaky gut is the marketed term for intestinal permeability, and it's real, but the nuance is that it's not the root cause of every illness on Instagram. It is one piece of a puzzle, a real piece, a treatable piece, but not by any means the only piece. So would be remiss if we're talking about the gut without, again, visiting our friend glucagon-like peptide 1. So we've done 3 episodes in total on this, and then we've talked about GLP-1 in many other episodes, but a short version of why GLP-1 matters and why is that it is a gut hormone, and your intestines make it, specifically your L cells of the small intestine. It's a gut hormone that talks to the pancreas, the brain, and the stomach. So when you eat, your intestinal L cells release GLP-1, and that hormone tells your pancreas to release insulin, tells your stomach to slow down. It can delay gastric emptying, and tells your brain that you're full. And the gut is running a huge part of insulin release. And there's a thing called the incretin effect, which was one of the core defects, this decreased incretin effect. So basically, when sugar comes through your gut, you release more insulin than if the same sugar were infused through total parenteral nutrition. So an IV in your arm, for example, or straight into your blood. The gut amplifies the response of insulin, which is a good thing. You want insulin to respond when you have glucose. So in type 2 diabetes, that incretin effect is broken, and the L cells don't make enough GLP-1, or the body breaks it down too fast. So the medications like Ozempic, Mounjaro, Wegovy, Zepbound, those incretins enhance glucose-dependent insulin secretion by the pancreatic beta cell. They suppress the inappropriately secreted glucagon, that elevated glucagon secretion, and they slow or delay gastric emptying. So the GLP-1 medications are basically helping the gut do its job again. And they are not weight loss drugs that happen to lower blood sugar. They are gut hormones that happen to manage weight loss in some individuals that have that side effect. And that's why fiber is such a powerful tool as well.
Is there anything increased fiber can't do?
I'm telling you, fiber stimulates your L cells to make more of your own natural GLP-1. So eating fiber is a natural GLP-1 booster. So let's talk about what else the microbiome eats. So if the microbiome is doing all this work, let's talk about how to feed it, specifically in the realm of fiber, prebiotic fiber. So that's the onions, garlic, leeks, asparagus, oats, beans, lentils, green bananas, cooked and cooled potatoes, and apples.
Why the cooling of the potatoes?
So you're going to create resistant starch when you cool the potatoes. So if you cook a potato and let it cool, some of that starch turns into resistant starch, which is just your microbiome love it.
So just so we're clear, this is not a blanket endorsement for potato salad. This is just cold potatoes.
Yeah, I mean, if you could make a healthier potato salad, maybe not so much mayonnaise or what have you. So it's kind of the same with rice or pasta as well. Cooked and then cooled down has more resistant starch. So leftover potato salad would actually be better than potato salad the first go round, assuming it wasn't sitting out all day at the family reunion in the July heat. So that's a different story. That's a different kind of bonanza going on there.
Yeah. Unfortunately, I think I've been there and done that at least once or twice in my life. I'm blessed with iron guts. Tempered in Baghdad.
Your gut also likes fermented food, live active cultures, which the yogurt industry has run away with that big time. We've seen live active cultures on the side or marketed there somewhere.
Is kombucha kind of overselling it a little bit?
Not really strong research with kombucha. I just like to drink it because it's kind of like a low calorie tea. I like the little fizzy. It's just something different to drink. I don't know. Maybe one day we'll learn all of the great benefits. Personally, I have not seen a lot of strong research with kombucha, but kimchi, kefir, sauerkraut, real yogurt. So not all this highly processed, like everything, like what is it really exactly? High sugar content, like real yogurt, miso, tempeh, fermented foods deliver the bacteria directly to your gut and they feed the bacteria that you already have, which is good. And not a lot of people are eating fermented foods.
People like meat and ferments, Amber.
Stop. When I was looking at putting that in, I was like, Richie's he's gonna say
I got
mean
to.
ferments.
Yeah, I can't not do it. I gotta be me. True to myself.
All right. So Stanford did a study a couple of years back where people who ate 6 servings of fermented foods a day for 10 weeks had measurably more diverse microbiomes and lower inflammation just from food.
How many
6 servings? That's quite a bit. I mean, it's a lot.
Like you would have to just eat meat and ferments, I think.
No, because I mean, sauerkraut doesn't have a lot of calories. Kimchi doesn't have a lot of calories.
But like, what's a serving of sauerkraut?
It'd be like a half a cup cooked.
That's a lot of. You're talking about 3 cups of sauerkraut a day?
Yeah.
That's a lot. Never mind. So, I mean, in my mind, what I'm thinking about is like the sodium content of that. Because I have not found.
But I think you could do better
sodium.
with miso and tempeh in terms of like getting your servings in. Yeah. When I was doing this, I'm like more miso and tempeh in our household because exactly what you said. Even though I love sauerkraut and usually we'll have it with like a plant-based sausage. Then polyphenols are another thing that your gut bacteria really enjoy having.
Which is that fruit that we were talking about earlier.
Yes, those are the colorful pigments in plants. Your dark colored berries, dark chocolate, green tea, also olive oil. Coffee has lots of polyphenols. Herbs and spices are a really good source of polyphenols. So the more colorful your plate in general, the more polyphenols that you have. So you have fiber, polyphenols, fermented food. So I think the take-home message is that the strongest evidence is for a variety in your diet, a variety of colors in your foods that you have, especially plant-based foods there. So it's not a specific probiotic strain or a supplement or a superfood. It's for feeding your microbiome a variety of minimally processed foods, plant foods rich in fermentable fiber. That's where science is really the most consistent. And you're going to get the biggest bang for your buck there. So when we talk about fat as an organ, leptin resistance, gut bacteria, like I hope at least that we've continued to paint with each episode, more and more of this story that this is not a willpower failure. Like, to say that's a gross oversimplification is a gross oversimplification to even say. This is a complex, multi-organ, multi-hormone, multi-cellular condition, and it has nothing to do with how strong or weak-minded anyone is. It's biology that's been pushed past what that 1.0 software version was designed for. Modern stress, modern lights. Like, even telling my age, I remember when I was younger, everything was closed on Sunday. Everything was closed past 5 or 7 p.m. There was nothing open. Like, you're hungry after that time, unless it's a certain restaurant or fast food. Even fast food chains, I feel like, closed at 8 or 9. They were not these 24-hour 1 or 2 in the morning. Like, that did not exist when we were youngins, you know.
In the previous millennia.
Yeah, I feel like we're all a bunch of sea turtles. We need the lights off and down, and we continue with these lights 24/7. So all of these things respond to walking, lifting, sleep, reducing high fructose corn syrup, reducing ultra-processed foods.
This episode for me was really just
oil,
control what you can control. All this other stuff is your organs
Control the controllables.
And systems going amok. In spite of all that, I still can choose to walk more. I still can choose to diversify the plant-based sources that are going into my mouth. And I could do that every day. I could do that every week. And I can just, until the body gets in line, because I am increasing that amount of movement. I am increasing that diversity of plant-based foods. And
I think an add to what you just said would be variety over volume too. It'd be better to have a quarter cup of this fruit and a quarter cup of that fruit and a quarter cup of that one than to have a cup of just blueberries. Kind of similar
have
a quarter cup of 3 different types.
Don't just work on your chest and biceps when you go to the gym. You might want to do some external rotation.
You might want to work on your legs.
There. Yeah. Work on my legs? What are you talking about?
I'm not talking about you. I'm just saying that as a statement for whoever feels that I was talking to them. Yeah. All right. So that is part 2, and we'll continue with part 3 and continue to work all the core defects into more practical applications of your body, like we just did with the forgotten organs.
All right. Well, this has been yet another episode of Diabetes Podcast. That's it for this episode. Be sure to tune in next time when we wrap up this series on the core deficiencies revisited. Until next time, take courage. You can do this, and we can help.